When it comes to getting explosive sounding drums and vocals while using a compressor, one of the first ones you might think about is the Empirical Labs Distressor. However, if you're someone who works inside the box, you might be trying to look for a plug-in version of this piece of hardware. Well, that's where Kiive Audio comes into play. They have made what is their take on the Distressor with their plugin they call the Xtressor, and we're going to be doing a complete walkthrough of this plugin today. But before we do that, like what we always do, let's first go ahead and roll that intro. All right, so for those of you who are not already familiar with the hardware unit that is called the Distressor, please allow me to give you a brief overview. The Distressor was actually made after its founder had a love for classic compressors that we all know today, legendary compressors such as the LA2A, the LA3A, and the 1176. Now, what they wanted to do was something ambitious. They wanted to create a single compressor that could actually emulate the sounds of all three of those other compressors that I previously mentioned. Thus, the Distressor was born. Now, there's been different iterations of the Distressor that has came out, starting with the EL8, but the one that I want to go ahead and focus on is the EL8-X. And the reason why is because Kiive Audio has made their own plugin that emulates this specific version. Not only that, but they have additional features that you would only be able to have access to by using it as a plugin. So today what we're going to go ahead and do is go inside of Pro Tools and listen to what this plugin can do with some drums. So let's go ahead and do that next. So we're here inside of Pro Tools now, and as you can see, I have the Xtressor loaded up, and it looks extremely similar to the EL8-X. Now, what I want to go ahead and do is before we actually look over all the different parameters for this plugin, I actually want to take a listen to some drums I loaded up inside of Pro Tools. That way we have a frame of reference, as you will, or a starting point, so that way we know what the drums sound like by themselves before we go ahead and put this plugin on it. So let's go ahead and take a listen to those drums now. Awesome. Okay, now let's go ahead and now listen to the same drum tracks with the default settings of the Xtressor on. And actually, you can already see here inside of QClone, there is some change to the tonality. So let's go ahead and see what we got. For those of you who have used a Distressor before, you know that sounds very, very similar to, again, the original unit. But now let's go ahead and go from top to bottom on this plugin and go over all the parameters so that way you know how to use this unit. Starting at the top left, the first thing we're introduced to is that we have this presets drop-down menu. Now, I'm not going to go over all the different presets, just know that there are several presets for an assortment of different audio sources. Everything from drums, bass, guitar, to vocals, anything that you might imagine. They even have presets for your mix bus, so that way you can go ahead and see what this sounds like on your total mix. All right. To the right of that, we do have our input and our output knob. That way we can go ahead and adjust the volume going in and out of the plugin itself. And then to the right of this, we have an oversampling menu, which is nice to see here. Now, by default, it is off, but if you do have the capacity with your CPU to go ahead and use this, you can go ahead and go all the way up to times 16. For now, for this demonstration though, I'll go ahead and leave it off. Next, we do have, by default, auto gain on. And this is great because what it does is analyzes the audio going into the plugin to go ahead and determine what the input and output should be. That's great to see on this plugin. Lastly here, what we do have is going to be this width parameter. This is great if we want to go ahead and adjust the stereo imaging to go ahead and make this a mono signal, or if we want to go ahead and, again, exaggerate the side information. All right, now that we've gone over all that, what I want to go ahead and do is look at these first two modules here, and we're going to go over all the parameters. So let's go ahead and do that next. As you can probably already tell, the two modules that we have in front of us are just simply two Distressors stacked on top of one another. Now, the reason why this is because Kiive Audio is giving us the ability to go ahead and use this plugin, the Xtressor, in three different modes. We have stereo, mid-side, and mono. And to know what mode you're in, all you need to do is look down at the bottom middle section of the plugin, here where it says Xtressor mode. And as you can see, by default, it's actually set to stereo. When set to stereo, the top module will be responsible for the left information, and the bottom module will be responsible for the right. If we switch this to mid-side though, the top module is now responsible for the middle, and the bottom module is now responsible for the side information. Now, we also do have a mono mode as well, in case you do want to use that. Now, one other thing to also indicate as well is that when I go ahead and change the parameters for one of these different modules, you're going to see it's going to do the same thing for the bottom. But what if you want to break this link? We do have a stereo image link here where we can go ahead and disable it. Once we do that, now we can go ahead and control one of these modules independent from the other. For now, I'm gonna go ahead and bring back the default settings, having them linked together. Now what I wanna go ahead and do is actually go over the different parameters of this plugin that actually affects the compression. So let's go ahead and look at that next. Starting on the right-hand side of this compressor, you can actually see we have 4 different controls to work with. We have our input, our attack, our release, and our output. And all of them are set to 5 by default. This is actually pretty cool to see here because on the original hardware unit, it was actually recommended by Empirical Labs that these are set to 5 when trying to start dialing at a compression tone. So this is pretty cool to see that Kiive Audio is showing the same type of respect to what the suggestion is that Empirical Labs is giving you. So great to see that there. All right, now on the left-hand side, we do have our ratios. We have everything from as low as 1:1 and it climbs all the way up to 20:1. And then additionally, it even has a nuke button, which allows us to add the most amount of compression that we can to our audio. What I want to go ahead and do now is we're going to leave these settings at 5 on all 4 of these controls, but I want to go ahead and play with the different ratios, starting with 2:1 and see what that does for our drums. So let's go ahead and take a listen. All right, 3:1. 4:1. All right, let's do 20:1 and then nuke. You know, one thing I gotta say so far that I really enjoy about this, there hasn't been a single one of these ratios that we've used that I've disliked, but by far my favorites are definitely the 20:1 and to nuke. I think 20:1 is perfect for this specific source, but it is really interesting to hear the different types of sounds that you can get with the different types of ratios that you have available to you. All right. Next thing I want to go ahead and do now is actually look at these different modes because they play a very vital part to how the Distressor works. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that. So I have a second instance of the Xtressor loaded up, and this is actually going to be manipulating our signal source from Qclone. The reason why I'm doing this is I want to be able to visually show you the changes that are happening when we go ahead and use these different modes. It's quite neat to see here. So let's go ahead and start here with the left column under the mode section here, which is going to be the high pass. If I go ahead and turn this on, you can actually see here in Qclone that there's a little bit of a boost, but that's not entirely true. It's not really a boost. What's happening here is when we go ahead and click this mode, it's actually telling the compressor to not to compress anything below 80 Hertz. This is so that way it resolves the issue where, like in some songs where there's a little bit of a pumping effect that happens due to the amount of low end energy from the kick drum. So that is nice to see that there. Below this, we do have this bell mode. And what this does is it actually applies compression to areas in the 6K region. This is for situations where you have audio sources that tend to be a little bit too harsh. You can use this mode and it should help you out with that. Next is going to be a combination of the two of them together, where it's actually going to be sidechaining the low end information and still you can use that bell mode as well. Next, we do have a link mode. With link mode, what it actually does, it would link two compressors together, or two distressors. In this situation, because we have this stereo link mode, we don't really need to use that, but as you can see, there's already a little bit of a tonal difference, so you can use this to get a little bit of a different sound. And obviously, if we click through the rest of these different buttons, we have different variations of these three modes. All right. Now let's go ahead and look at this right column. For the second column in our mode section here, this is actually referring to the different type of filters that we can use while using this compressor, which is pretty neat because it allows us to go ahead and change the color and the tonality of our sound. One of the most basic filters that it comes included is if we go ahead and hit the type button, it actually enables a traditional high pass filter, which will go ahead and remove the audio below 80 Hertz. So that's cool to see there. Next, we have what they call DS2 and DS3. This is referring to the harmonics that we can go ahead and add to our signal source. For DS2, this is going to be in regards to second harmonics, and DS3 will be for third harmonics. Now, last thing I want to mention, when you go ahead and toggle this button, it'll actually allow you to be able to select one of these modes or a combination with them. So as you can see here, we have our different combinations. All right. Now that we had a chance to go ahead and visually see what these different modes can do, let's go ahead and hear what this sounds like on our drums. Great, now that we had a chance to listen to what our drums sound like with all those different modes, there's one last parameter I want to go over before we move to the bottom section of this plugin, and that's going to be this British mode. What this does, it actually replicates the same effect as if you were pressing in all the buttons for the ratio on an 1176. But instead of having to do that yourself, you simply can go ahead and turn this button on. So just keep that in mind. All right, now let's go ahead and look at the bottom section of this plugin. So we have finally made it to the bottom section of the Xtressor here. Now, I do have to say, this is where the hardware unit, the Distressor, starts to differ from the plugin here that we see. So at the bottom left-hand side, we do see we have a saturation knob, which is obviously over here on the right-hand side as well, because we have our stereo mode. But what will happen is as I go ahead and start to crank this thing, you'll notice inside of Q-Clone that the actual signal starts to get more distorted or saturated. Let's go ahead, bring this back down to 0. Let's go ahead and take a listen what this does to our drums as we start to crank this thing. Awesome, great. Now, in the middle section here, we actually see we have this mix saturation knob. What this will allow us to do is actually go ahead and allow us to blend our very saturated signal with our dry signal, giving us the best of both worlds. So let's go ahead and mess with that and see what that does. All right, sounds pretty nice. It's nice to be able to have that ability to go ahead and add some saturation to our drums, but again, while blending that with our original signal. All right, what I'm gonna do next is bring that back up to 100%. Let's now go ahead and look at this warmth knob. What this does, as I start to crank it here, it's not actually going to be giving us a boost. What it's actually doing here, and we can see in Q-Clone, it's going to actually roll off the high end a little bit, giving us that perspective that this signal is actually warmer. Now, this also works the same way where as we go ahead and pull back our saturation mix knob here, that it will actually go ahead and remove some of this as well. So let's go ahead, we'll leave it at 100%. Let's go ahead and bring this back down to 0. Let's play our drums and hear what this sounds like. So as you could hear, our drums certainly got darker sounding. Now you can go ahead and use these two different controls together in order to get that final sound that you like. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and bring this back down to 0. And another control I wanna mention here is gonna be this on-off switch, which will allow us to go ahead and disable this as well. One last knob I want to go ahead and look at is going to be this mix comp knob. This is actually going to allow us to take our original settings here. I'm going to bring this back to default, which is a 6:1 ratio, and go ahead and do a parallel compression that's going on. So let's go ahead, play back, and start to manipulate our mix compression. Perfect, and as you can hear, as we went ahead and pulled back, it started to reintroduce our original dry signal, but still keeping some of that compression. In fact, we have more compression than we do the original signal, but that is a nice way to go ahead and blend those two sounds together. And we have finally reviewed all of the controls of the Kiive Audio Xtressor. What did you guys think about it? And if you do have the Distressor, the hardware unit, I'm very interested to know what you thought between the plugin and the hardware. All right, now, before you leave, I would simply ask if you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing and also leaving a like. It does help this channel grow. Also, if you did like this video and you're looking for similar content, I recently made a video where I actually did a review and walkthrough of a plugin that replicates the sound of a Neve 5033 EQ. So if you're interested in that, make sure to check that out. All right, once again, thank you so much for staying till the end. I deeply appreciate it. And with that being said, happy mixing.